do want to ask you about one of those quarterback contracts. You mentioned Dak, and it's been one of the best deals in the NFL from his first 4 year, $160 million deal in 2021 after multiple franchise tags, and then kind of holding the Cowboys with their hands tied last offseason to getting that unbelievable 4 year, $240 million deal, which is $60 million per year. Was the plan for you and Todd always to gain that leverage and roll the dice early in his career? Or were you guys like, we just didn't get the best offers and we kind of fell into this situation and now we have all the cards? Because I don't think there's ever been a quarterback situation that's been handled better than what Dak has done in Dallas, which is a credit to you guys.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. No, it was very strategic from the very first conversations with the Cowboys. They had a tradition of these long contracts where you look at, all of their guys going back, they're 5, 6, 7, even 10-year contracts, and so our focal point of that negotiation was we should have a 4-year contract because that's going to maximize the guarantees where the 3 years are going to be guaranteed, and then we're going to be back at the table. And just looking at how quickly the quarterback market grows, that extra year is so important. So when other guys were signing, 10-year contracts, we were looking at saying, if we can do a 4-year contract, we're going to get 2+ contracts in that same window. And the salary cap is going to be, 100% up during that time. So it was 100% very, very strategic and planned on our side, where we were thinking about, how do we eliminate their ability to use franchise tags? How do we force them to the table early on in the off season if we're at a situation where he hasn't played up to it or the things haven't gone well? Like, how do we make sure that we get to free agency at the start of March rather than a potential pay cut conversation in July or August? So every aspect of the deal was like, we sat for months, it felt like, just going back and forth on what else do we need to make this the perfect contract and to set us up for 3 years from now when the cap is way up and we're back at the table negotiating that third deal for Dak. And when we're talking about the $60 million per year, there is still conversations of we got to be thinking about 3 years from now when the cap is up even more, and Dak is looking for one more deal before the end of his career.
Yeah, I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving with that contract. So it's quite incredible. They can't franchise tag him, they can't trade him. The cap number keeps on going up. It's unbelievable, and I think he will have one more bite of the apple here at the end of his career as well. But how important is it? I don't know how involved you are when it comes to this, of getting the player to believe in the plan, because we all know about the injury risk and wanting the security. And Dak was a fourth round pick, so he's barely made money in his career. How important is it just to get the player to believe in your plan? And was Dak always all in on this with what you and Todd wanted to do here?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to have the player on board. Ultimately, they're the decision maker. So when you're thinking through, what is our strategy, what is going to make the most sense for the player in the long term, you don't look at it as like, oh, how do I convince them or how do I manipulate them into thinking what I want? You lay out the facts that we find to be very compelling as to why we should do it this way, and ultimately the some of the players are going to say, well, I hired you to do this, so go ahead and handle it. And some of them are going to want to be very educated. And so we sat down specifically with Dak multiple times on multiple occasions to say, hey, this is what's on the table. Here's the risks that are involved. Here's what we think if the worst case scenario happens. Here's what you're still going to walk away with. If the best case scenario happens, then here's what we're going to end up with if we say yes or if we say no. And really just having that sliding scale of risk and reward and going through with them. And ultimately it's up to the player to decide, what is their tolerance for risk, and, what is the reward at the end of the rainbow.
Mentioned before how you guys had Tua and Jordan Love and Dak all at the same time. Just how great is it to have multiple players at the same position who are all in need of a payday, and just having that collaboration between all sides of Europe, knowing this is where we're at, this is where you're at, this is what we think it's going to go to. Like, how key is that, and how much do you guys rely on, even though it's different agents in each situation? Like Tua was Ryan and Jordan was David, and obviously Dak was Todd. But at least having that communication, knowing all of you are under the same umbrella.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, that's the strength of the big agency and the strength of Athletes First. I think we look at that as something that if we weren't taking advantage of that, we'd be doing a disservice to our clients. And so that constant line of communication, and that's a good example with the quarterbacks, but we do it at multiple positions almost every year, where we are able to gather all of the information about each player from each team and really kind of look at it from a much broader scope and say, this is the one that's going to make the most sense for everyone involved. And so this is the way that we should approach this. And that could be whether it's timing. So, this guy should go first because then this one's going to build on it, or they should continue to negotiate around the same time. So all of those things, it's information that we can use to leverage the deal the way we want to.
You mentioned before how, again, there are so many agents there at A1, and you're involved now with all of them, even though initially when you joined Todd, you thought it's only Todd, and now all of a sudden you have all these other guys that you're working with. Aside from Dak, which I would imagine is the most memorable one you have, what are some of the other negotiations that you've been involved with that kind of come to mind that, okay, I enjoy that process and the outcome? I know Brian Burns was one which I was fascinated by, but like, what are some other ones where it might have taken some time, but eventually you guys got the results you guys wanted?
Yeah, I think the quarterbacks are always memorable because it's just the position and the aura that comes with doing a quarterback deal. That's why we have the podcast that we did where it's all about the quarterback deals. But anytime you're doing a record-setting deal, whether it's Aaron Donald's deal that we reset the top of the market by over $10 million per year, that was super memorable. And just everything that went into doing a negotiation for a player that had 3 years left and was 31 years old. And possibly, well, in my opinion, the best defensive player in NFL history. The difficulty of doing a trade and new deal like we did with Brian Burns, I think the level of difficulty that makes it, you feel even more like proud of your work at the end of it because there had those challenges. Derek Stingley's deal this year, where just pushing the top of the market so much and having people say like, how impressive they thought it was. Those types of things are great. I think the one that might be the most memorable for me, though, and because of the way that Brian Murphy, our CEO, pushed us at the beginning of it, is Daniel Jones. And I will never forget, I was on the golf course on a Saturday morning thinking I was, free and clear for the weekend. I get a call and he says, "Hey, I have this master plan. We're going to send a proposal to the Giants on Monday. It's going to be a whole history of the quarterback market and where Daniel fits into it." So I spent the next 72 hours building out a 42-page manifesto, I think the Giants called it, that gave a history of the quarterback position since 2010-ish, and eventually a proposal. So you had to read through 41 pages to actually see our first proposal to the Giants. It was, it was absurd at the time. Looking back, it's still absurd, but it inevitably got us to the point where we did a buzzer beater deal where there were seconds left before the deadline when we got his contract done. So that one was super memorable for me.